Welcome to Clockworks, a Legion podcast. I'm Paul Moffat.
I'm Jan Moffat.
And it's time again for us to talk about our wrap-up of Season 2.
Time, hey?
Yeah, I mean, like, go simple. Go classic.
Pretty classic.
You don't have to always cut me down.
That's our shtick, though.
Okay, so you always have to cut me down.
Yeah.
This is the second part of our Season 2 wrap-up episode. We're going to start by talking through the characters and what we think about the journeys of these characters throughout this season. Do you want to take it away?
So let's start with Clark.
Okay.
Let's kind of go, like, minor to major in terms of characters. So let's start with Clark.
All right.
So he's become more of a major character this season.
Much more.
And frankly, I really like him this season.
Me too.
I kind of liked him last season and he was interesting, but I like his inclusion in the cast this time around. How about you?
I have always been on record as being a Hamish Linklater fan. I don't know what even it is about him. Every time he's on screen, also in Fargo, he shows up in season 3 of Fargo, and I just found him delightful.
Mm-hmm.
So I've always liked him, and I like him. I continue to like him a lot as an actor, and that makes me really like him as a character, even if there wasn't anything else. Two of my favorite moments. Well, no. Let me just say, I have some favorite Clark moments that I want to highlight, and then maybe we can talk about whether we think his character develops or changes through the season.
Mm-hmm.
But 3 real highlights of his character that come to mind. The first are when he's interrogating David in the chapter 11, chapter 9, whatever it is. The first episode of this season.
Yeah, chapter 9.
Chapter 9, White Rabbit. Where they go to the diner, and he's like, I used to eat a lot of ice cream. We played this game where anytime there was an evil twin, I would eat ice cream. And then ice cream that he had previously ordered comes, and he's like, sorry, you were saying? And
yeah.
Takes a bite of ice cream. Like, it is so fantastic. It shows so much about him as a character. It's just a hilarious and, it's a hilarious moment. It shows so much, skill in the actor,
mm-hmm.
the timing of that whole bit. And what it shows about him as a character, right, is he's like suspicious, but also about the plans. He anticipates and plans what he's going to do.
Yes.
Right? Even if it's just to drop a sick burn.
Mm-hmm.
He's thought ahead to where it's going in the end.
Yeah.
And the second one I really love is just, like, the moment in Bad Eggs, whichever chapter that is, where he's walking along and the Vermilions are following him, and he keeps looking behind and they pose. And that's not really a him character moment. It's just a moment of the show that is about, that he is central in. That's one of my favorite moments of the whole season 2.
Absolutely. That is a great, great moment.
And finally, I really like his conversation with Sid, where they're like, he's like, it's just us girls. You can just talk to me. And no, you can't.
No,
but also,
not.
I can really see why she would.
Mm-hmm.
He does very well at being disarming, at being like creating the sense of intimacy.
Yeah.
Of like, well, you can just gossip about your boyfriend. And the line that I don't think is fair, I don't think he is right for saying it, but it is a good line of like, your boyfriend could turn evil and destroy the world if you hurt his feelings real bad.
Mm-hmm.
It's not fair to put that on her at all, but that's a great line.
Yeah, I agree.
And it reveals a lot of the same things that his ice cream conversation does. Like, it reveals that he's always got a plan. He's always working an angle, but he's also really charming.
Clark is extremely insightful.
Yes.
And we see in this season how right he was in the first season.
Yep.
We see that, like, he kept telling them that David was dangerous, and no one, even David, believed him. And we get an echo of Clark's exact line from season 1 saying, one day you guys are going to wake up and realize you're gods. And David says the exact same line. One of the Davids in his head says that exact line.
Yeah.
Again to David saying, you're a god.
Which establishes that back in season 1, Clark had David's number.
Yeah, exactly. He knew. He's insightful and smart, and he's continued to be that.
Mm-hmm.
I want to speak a little bit to how they film him.
Yep.
Which I think is brilliant. It's always going back and forth between, he's always in shadow.
Yep.
And whether the burned side of his face is showing or the unburned side, I feel like every time that happens, it is significant.
Yep.
It is showing a certain side of him, and whether he's trusting or untrusting, or whether he's even good and evil.
Yep.
Almost in that moment.
And
but it's more complicated than that.
And it's easy, it's easy to forget, but it's also, I think, important to keep in mind that he was a primary antagonist in season 1.
Mm-hmm.
So, or a secondary antagonist, I guess, because the Shadow King was the primary one. He was the secondary antagonist of season 1, and now he's still, even though we're on the same side, he still is often in an antagonistic posture in relation to the rest of them.
Yeah.
And that scarring and the way it's shown kind of represents that visually, I think.
Mm-hmm. If I'm going to have a complaint about Clark, it's that in the last episode of the first season, we saw this whole backstory with him and his husband and his kid, and this season we saw none of them. As far as we saw, he doesn't have a husband or kid, and he seems like they're all sleeping in the building in Division 3,
yep.
And he was sleeping alone. So
yep.
Has his husband left him? It seemed like his husband worked for Division 3.
Yeah.
So is he gone? Is he dead? We didn't see the son when it showed the children in that little classroom area. His son was not there.
Yeah.
It's just what a difference a year makes. And I would love to know what happened to Clark's family, but I don't think we're going to be privy to that.
And I think that is a criticism that I share, that I think they should have given us something.
Yeah, because why did you make us care about his family? Why did you give us that moment without any follow-up?
So even if it was anything from it's hard during this assignment to be apart from them, while he's having his conversation with Sid would have been the perfect time to say that to disarm her.
Yeah. And
reveal a little bit to the audience of what's the deal with him. Or I don't trust you, David. Oliver seemed trustworthy and he killed my family.
Mm-hmm.
Or whatever. I don't care. I care a little bit, but it doesn't matter how that gets resolved, but I think it needed to be addressed somehow.
Yeah,
I was a little disappointed it wasn't.
Mm-hmm. So let's move on to Patanomy in this season.
Ooh.
Yeah. So, we could go forwards, but I want to go a little bit backwards to say, is he dead? He's dead, right? He's in the mainframe thing, but as far as we're concerned, he's dead and might even not be in the 3rd season.
I think maybe not. I think yes and no, because who is a character who was definitely dead, subsumed by some kind of psychic entity, and hey now is back with a body.
Yeah.
Right? They did that this season. So, Patonomy's body is dead. His mind is in the mainframe. It seems like it's being subsumed by whatever that is. I'm holding on to hope that Patanomy, in some degree, will be back next season.
I hope so, too.
Because they've established a precedent for that. And even they established pretty emphatically that Amy was dead when the Shadow King turns her into Lenny.
Mm-hmm.
But then we start to see Amy is still in Lenny's head.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So Amy's not dead either, necessarily. I don't actually expect Amy to be back bodily.
Mm-hmm.
But they have really made it plain that, well, death.
Yeah, it's true. It's true.
I think we complained at the end of season 1 that Patanomy had been underused, and I think the same thing this season.
Mm-hmm.
So, while I don't think necessarily he's gone forever, he definitely ends this season dead.
Yeah.
And that's a shame.
Yeah, I'm a little disappointed, to say the least. I really like Jeremy Harris, and he had such potential in the start, and I think they've squandered that a bit.
Yeah.
Even at the beginning of the season, I felt like he had potential again, and you had him as like the touch point for David coming back was really interesting. And then him in his maze and being the one who took around the eggs was interesting, but then just not quite. I think I missed the mark with him, with Patanomy.
I agree. His powers and personality are both very interesting. They were really important. His powers were really plot important in season 1.
Mm-hmm.
And less plot important in season 2, and maybe that's why he played a lesser role.
Yeah.
But there's a lot more to him than that, and we saw his character kind of develop further in this season. In season 1, he was either the memory guy or the violence guy. And in season 2, we're seeing him as a much more thoughtful character.
Yeah.
But I can kind of see that maybe in terms of plot, he serves a very similar role to what Clark does.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think they didn't quite know what to do with him, and that's too bad, because I like him a lot and want him to do stuff.
Same.
I loved talking about him in the maze. Him with his flower suit cutting flowers in the maze. Like, that's another season high point for me, just in terms of the visuals of that shot, which isn't really a note on his character. Much like Clark walking through the maze with Vermilions chasing him. Isn't necessarily a thing about his character, but it's one of my favorite moments of the series was one that featured him.
It's not, but I mean, it's not just visually beautiful. There's the ideas behind it of he wants to be in a world where he can just forget because he remembers everything.
Yeah.
Is actually a character moment that I really enjoy.
I also, another highlight for Patanomy for me is his conversation with Lenny where he talks about his theory of time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That was a great conversation and a great moment that I really enjoyed. There's the past, there's the future, there's no present. Even you see me, and it's very quick, but the light takes a fraction of an instant to travel, and it takes a fraction of time for your brain to interpret it, so it's not now.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's philosophically important. It also is really revealing of his character, that like in season 1 he's had the line, I like to think of myself as a time traveler, and here in season 2 he denies the existence of the present. Like, I just kind of want him to talk to us about his worldview some more.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know?
Absolutely.
Gonna move on?
Yeah. So, moving on from Patanomy.
Mm-hmm.
Though I'd like to mourn him a little more, and I'd like the show to mourn him a little more.
Yeah.
It's surprising
agreed.
how, like, this guy was their friend and they didn't really mourn him. Anyway, I have them lumped together, but Carrie and Carrie, we could talk about each of them separately.
We could.
So male Carrie. I feel like his arc this season was all about leading up to being disappointed by David.
Agreed.
Was he, of all people, has trust David and was very on his side and was building all these things for him and helping him every way he possibly could. And then that moment in the last episode where he goes, it's treachery.
Yeah.
And he's devastated.
Totally agree.
This is a man he thought he was his friend, and he realizes that he was wrong to trust him.
And think of the moment, one of the first moments of season 2 is David being brought into the lab, and they're all in these hazmat suits, and Carrie takes off his helmet. because it's not just that he, like, that's a visual moment, it's a symbolic moment of him trusting and having faith in David, that, like, he doesn't just trust David personally. He, like...
Excuse me, sorry.
He doesn't just trust David personally and trust his good intentions or whatever. He believes that David is benevolent, that David's influence on the world is going to be good, that David doesn't pose a threat to him, that David's not contagious, like, and that's all symbolized by he takes off his protection.
Yeah.
He literally makes himself vulnerable for David,
Yes.
and then spends the rest of the season doing that. And when David sends Carrie and Carrie off on their plan, male Carrie is the one who keeps saying, like, we just have to trust him.
Yeah, exactly.
He has a plan, we're just going to do it because we trust him.
Yeah.
And then, absolutely, he is so betrayed when David betrays Sid. He is so disillusioned.
Yeah. And we know that apparently in the future he builds this sphere.
Yeah.
And I feel like that would happen because of his feelings of betrayal. He would want to do everything he could to stop that from happening.
Yeah, agreed. I have to shout out, as I did in our wrap-up of season 1, but I have to just shout out again for actors who I really like. I think Bill Irwin is extremely talented as an actor. I mean, he gets a lot of credit for his, both from me and from other people, for, like, his comic ability. He's an amazing physical comedian and physical actor, and there's moments where, like, you know, he walks off in the wrong direction and that kind of thing. But he's also, like, really a compelling actor to just watch doing anything.
Yeah.
I think, again, highlights of this character, this apparently is, I wasn't planning on it, but this apparently is a thing I'm going to do for every character as we go through. When he's making we have again a Bill Irwin dance scene. When he's first puts David in the resonator chamber, also in Chapter 9, White Rabbit, and the music starts playing, and the dance fight, and Bill Irwin starts dancing in the real world.
Yeah, it's intercut with Bill Irwin.
And it's like, first of all, of Bill Irwin, Jermaine Clement, and Dan Stevens all dancing at the same time, Bill Irwin is the actual best dancer of those three by quite a large margin.
Yeah.
It also is this, like, it's symbolic, I think, of his sympathy with David. He's there with him.
Yeah.
Right? He's dancing because David's dancing. It's a weird and wonderful moment that I really enjoy.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Female Carrie.
Yeah. So you last season were like, I want to see more, or even the beginning of this season, you want to see more of why she's so badass. And I think they delivered.
I think so. We have 2 big fight scenes with her. And they both... Unfortunately, they have a bit of a tendency to film her in slow motion, and what's her name? Amber Midthunder is not as physically imposing as Carrie is. And so, like, her punches, it'd be best to film it in fast motion, not in slow motion, is all I'm saying. Because when everybody's form is susceptible to criticism when you slow it all down.
Yeah, exactly.
And her punches that look weak when you slow them down, just, like, speed it up and show her knocking people out. But her fight scene with all the Vermilions, and then her fight scene with all the blue guys
safe-headed guys,
are both, like, putting your money where your mouth is. Instead of just telling us that she's tough, show us, especially her fight with the safe-headed guys, where everyone else collapses and she starts to, and then is just like, no. I'm not going to be knocked out by this sound, and she beats them all up, and it is great.
As well as her toughness, we get her vulnerability this season. We get her not knowing, like, when they switch places where male Carrie has to be inside, and how desperate she is for it not to be that way, and how they don't want to rejoin because it might go that way again, and she's just doesn't want to live in the world. She doesn't know how to live in the world. She's such a child in some ways.
Yeah.
And so we see, a lot of her vulnerability and her inability to function as a singular person.
Yep.
That makes her sympathetic and an interesting character.
And there was some criticism. The scene where Carrie and Carrie are in like the Chinese restaurant and they're talking, and she says, "I'd stab death twice in the heart before he got to you."
Mm-hmm.
I saw some criticism of people being like, "She's like a fighter and kills people. Does she not understand what death is?" And like, I don't think that was meant to indicate that she literally doesn't know what death is. But it indicates exactly what you were saying, that like she's vulnerable and childish about things like that.
Yeah.
About a lot of things, really.
And where male Carrie is emotional and vulnerable and a sensitive person, she is the opposite and doesn't know what to do with vulnerability.
Yeah, for sure. Season high for female Carrie is just her being so excited about fighting a Minotaur.
Yeah, totally.
Did I tell you I fought a Minotaur? You know what its blood smelled like? Didn't taste like that, though. It's like,
yeah.
So great. And also gross.
Yep, exactly.
So what about Melanie?
Melanie. She was barely in the season in a lot of ways. There was a lot of episodes she was absent from entirely.
Especially in the first, 2/3.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, we find out at the end kind of why, and we just get this sense the entire season that she's wasting away her potential.
Mm-hmm.
Which she basically is.
Yep.
But this is such a different Melanie. It's hard to wrap my head around the difference between this Melanie and season 1 Melanie. How about you?
Yeah, agreed. And it's interesting because season 1 Melanie also had been abandoned by Oliver. But the difference is that, the second time.
And the lack of hope.
The lack of hope. The insight that, I say insight because it's like a sudden moment of understanding that might not be true, but it feels to her like understanding. Whether it's true or not is irrelevant to my point. But the insight that this is a cycle, that he's always going to abandon her.
Mm-hmm.
All it takes is twice for something to be a pattern. Right?
Yeah.
We saw a bit of this Melanie, I think, in Mental Clockworks.
Yes.
This
is very similar to that Melanie.
That fragile Melanie has come to the surface.
Mm-hmm. She's also grows dark through the season and is influenced by the Shadow King.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's interesting how her bedroom has this, everyone else just has normal windows, but she has this pattern on her windows of black and then growing hexagons out of it. Mm-hmm. And I really feel like from the first moment you see her, you see this pattern on her wall, and it really reflects what is happening with Melanie. She's going to pieces and she's going dark.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep.
And where she ends up in the end of the season is on the astral plane with Oliver. And that was a really surprising turn for me. I did not expect her to actually want that. I thought she was mad at him.
And is that a happy ending for her? Because I think that's the kind of thing that this show gives us emotional and narrative red herrings a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Where it presents us something like, hey, look, she got a happy ending. I'm not sure that we want to naively accept this as Melanie is now happy.
Yeah.
We will wait and see what happens, but on one hand, this is what she has wanted all along. She doesn't have a dream. She just wants to be with Oliver and live with him and be in a cabin in the woods or whatever. That motif that we didn't talk about in motifs, but comes up from several characters' mouths. She kind of gets that at the end, but it's also kind of erasing her.
Yes, exactly.
As is symbolized by the loss of memory and loss of words, and that Oliver's time in the ice cube in the first place was traumatic.
Mm-hmm.
And now he's back there and she's with him, and them being together doesn't prevent them from kind of fading away.
Mm-hmm. And they're losing bits of themselves in the exact same way Oliver did before.
Exactly.
Like losing words and concepts of things. People's names.
The girl who would kick.
Yes, exactly. Glasses, McLab coat, and the girl who would kick. That was my favorite.
I love that's my name for Carrie from now on. Maybe the rest of Clockworks, anytime we're talking about Carrie and Carrie, just to not be confusing, we should just call them Glasses, McLab coat, and the girl who would kick.
So speaking of Oliver,
Mm-hmm.
should we move on to his arc in the season?
Yeah. What do we think about Oliver this season?
Well, I mean, once again, I was surprised at the direction they went in. Because for the first, lots of the season, he was trapped with Farouk, but also seemed to be asserting dominance, seemed to be working on some kind of plan. And then in the end, none of that came to fruition. Unless it did and we're not seeing it.
Yeah. That line about, I'm going to kill you, here's the clue. Nothing came of that at all.
No.
That we could see. And so, I mean, we're going to talk about our predictions, but I expect that we're going to have some kind of answer to that eventually. Mm-hmm. And if we don't get an answer to that, then I think, I just think that's a mistake. Because while this season is all about mazes and loose endings and dead ends, and maybe that's the answer to this, it's a question we don't get an answer to because this is a season of dead ends.
Mm-hmm.
But it leaves Oliver as a character very unresolved.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Maybe he will just be unresolved, but that's unsatisfying.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. He wanted to, when he's talking to Melanie in her head about him being frozen,
Mm-hmm.
that what he wanted was for her to get rid of his body so he could just be free on the astral plane. And so it's weird that it's he was trapped in the ice cube because she didn't get rid of his body.
Yeah. And that's a weird, it's a point of comparison with him and Farouk, whose whole goal this whole season is to find his body.
Yeah.
And Oliver's is to get rid of his.
Yeah.
It makes me wonder, we can never really trust this season anything that Oliver says until that last scene in the ice cube again.
Mm-hmm.
We can never really trust anything that he says because he's under the influence of the Shadow King, and what he's saying is actually what he thinks and wants himself.
Yeah, exactly.
Even in conversations with Farouk,
mm-hmm.
It's hard to be certain when he's genuine. You know?
Absolutely.
And they really make that very clear in the scene where David tortures him.
Mm-hmm.
That, you, the audience, and the characters inside can't tell the difference between Oliver and Farouk.
Yeah. And he acts strangely.
Yeah. Through the whole season.
But he's always acted strangely.
Yeah.
So
what's normal Oliver?
Yeah, I just don't know.
Yep. I mean, beat poets and freeform jazz.
Yeah. Speaking of favorite Oliver moments, I gotta say, just my favorite Oliver thing is that he just always has a martini in his hand. Somehow he just gets that martini. Who knows where it comes from? Most of the time it's in his head.
Yeah.
But Oliver always has that martini, and I think it's brilliant. I think it's a great character note.
Agreed.
It says so much about his character just in that one thing.
I think, once more, like, to gush about every single one, but Jermaine Clement has been a favorite of mine and ours all along.
Mm-hmm.
And he continues to be.
Yeah.
So I really hope there's another one that I hope we see lots of next season, because I think Jermaine Clement is the best.
Mm-hmm.
Favorite, my like little moment, but season high for Oliver is him locking his lips and throwing away the key, and it makes a ding noise when it hits the ground.
Yeah, that's great. It's a great moment.
It's not, once more, it's like a show moment that he's in, rather than a character moment, really.
Yeah, absolutely. So moving on, let's talk a bit about Lenny.
Let's talk a bit about Lenny.
I mean, wow. What an unexpected, unheard of shift. Like, we spent all last season with her being the Shadow King, and then this season with her being trapped and then suddenly there in real life.
Yeah, and I mean, we should remember how in season 1 we spent most of the season unsure about what Lenny's deal was.
Yes, that's true.
Was she real Lenny? Was she in David's head? Was she malevolent? Was she an aspect of David's personality? Was she independent from David? And it wasn't till like the end of season 1 that we got anything close to a solid answer on those. And even at the beginning of season 2, the second episode of season 2, where they're on the carousel with Lenny and Oliver and David's talking to Lenny and like, was any part of you the Lenny that I know? And she doesn't give him a straight answer at that point.
Mm-hmm.
So I talked about like Oliver I talked about Clark being a secondary antagonist who becomes like much more sympathetic in this season in some ways. But Lenny is like the face of the villain for season 1 at the end. When we finally do get an answer on who Lenny really is, she's like the only face we've had for the Shadow King.
Mm-hmm.
And then this season, we spend a lot of time again with not really sure who exactly Lenny is. Right?
Yeah, exactly. We just don't know. So much of what Lenny is just this complete mystery. And even now when she's in physical form and she's taken Amy's body, how much of her personality is the former Lenny? How much of her personality is influenced by Amy? We just have no idea.
How much of her personality still maintains an influence from Farouk? One explicit question of both seasons has been how much is Farouk's influence still felt on David? And that same question applies to, maybe a lesser extent, but applies to Lenny.
Mm-hmm.
And like when she comes back bodily and she's talking to David and David's like, you're working with the Shadow King. And she's like, well, I'm not working with him.
Yeah. So what, can we even trust her ever? I don't think we can. I think the only constant is that we cannot trust anything Lenny says.
And even she can't. Like I believe her in that scene when she's like, I don't remember. I don't know where I got my body from. Like, I believe her.
Mm-hmm.
Right? That at her most reliable, most trustworthy ever in both seasons, she is a mentally unstable drug addict.
Yeah.
Which means that her perspective and judgment are not exactly reliable. Right?
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
her perspective on herself,
mm-hmm.
even.
Like, we still don't even know what exactly she did to end up in Clockworks.
No, because the stealing the shopping cart and running down the street and helping to rob the store, that was all Benny.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Nothing is clear.
And then, like, in the same kind of breath as Lenny, we should talk about Amy. I feel like when to part the curtain a bit, we talked about this off mic. We're going to talk about Lenny and Amy together because Amy has such a small presence this season that really when we're talking about Amy, we're talking about Lenny. We're talking about an aspect of Lenny mostly, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, Amy was... There's a few parts of this show, of this season, that I'm disappointed by. And the fact that last season David was so focused on finding his sister, and then this time he wakes up, and I know that he claims that it's only been a day for him. Even when he finds out it's been a year, he doesn't ask about Amy. I mean, I guess we can say that maybe he asked off camera, he asked whatever, but we don't ever see him care anymore about his sister.
Until she's gone.
Until she's been killed.
And the Shadow King says that, like, he is only pretending to care about Amy ever. Yeah. He resents her, actually.
Yeah.
We saw, I think, in Mental Clockworks that Amy subconsciously resents David. And the Shadow King tells us that David subconsciously resents Amy.
Yeah. It seems like that's all true.
We definitely see in the episode that's all in David's head, when David has real power, he definitely resents and mistreats Amy. And then and maybe, again, to take a step away from in-world and think a little bit meta, like, what does it mean for us to replace Amy with Lenny? That, like, there's a limited number of women David's allowed to care about?
That his relationship with Lenny is sisterly? Like the sister he wishes he had? Maybe. Someone to embrace his insanity instead of resist it? A sister that's more like a friend than a mother?
And there's a sense in which what happens to Amy when she transforms into Lenny is like a torture for David, but there's another sense in which it's wish fulfillment. He actually gets what he wants.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Do you think that we're going to, like I said when we were talking about Patonymy, I said that Amy's still around in some sense. We're going to talk predictions in a second, but right now, do you think we're going to see Amy again in season 3?
Yes. I think she is an aspect of Lenny now.
So, season favorite moments for Lenny, for me, are like her whole episode where she's off finding the blue octopus and having dreams and like, that was great to me. I really enjoyed that. And my very favorite moment, my very favorite Lenny moment of the season is her walking away from the burning car and then being like, oh yeah, and going back to get the gun. I'm on record at the time loving that moment, and I still do.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great moment. I think my favorite moment is when she sits with the safe-headed guys and kind of like, okay, I'm going to meditate with you for about like 3 seconds. And like, well, this isn't working. Let me try something else.
Yep.
Like, she just has no patience at all.
Except she then sits there as a sniper for a while. But That's then, true. As soon as she has shot the thing, she's like, okay, I'm done with this. And gets high. Man. She is great.
Yeah.
I mean, she's the worst.
Yeah.
But she's also very entertaining to watch.
Yeah, and Aubrey Plaza is an amazing actress and deserves all the things for this role.
Yeah. I think she's less in your face good this season than last. Like last season she was doing more really ostentatious acting. But I still love what she's doing this season.
Yeah, I agree.
So what do we want to say about Sid this season?
Oof. Well, there's basically 2 Sids. There's the Sid our normal Sid, and then there's future Sid.
Mm-hmm.
And whether future Sid is the same Sid all the way through is up for debate. But our normal, regular Sid definitely goes through a whole arc this season.
I think so too, yeah.
I think she changes most of everyone. Because we have her start off pining for David, happy he's back. He says, "Can I kiss you?" And she says, "You better." Like she wants him.
Yep.
The minute he gets back. But then that doesn't last for very much longer.
No.
As soon as he actually is back, she's unsure if she wants him.
Even when he very first appears, like, one of the first things she says to him is, "Where have you been?"
Mm-hmm.
And she doesn't say it. I mean, I remember remarking this at the time. She doesn't say it in, like, "I've missed you so much. I'm so glad you're back." She says it in, like, accusatory.
Yeah, absolutely.
"Where have you been?" And it's important when we talked about this, when we're talking about motifs, that her compass symbolizes that she's searching for David and not finding him all season.
Yeah.
She spends... I mean, do you think that we end this season with Sid now as the hero of the show?
I'm reluctant to use hero at all.
Yep.
But I think she definitely has protagonist qualities to her now.
Yeah.
I think that depending on how the third season goes, maybe she has been the protagonist all along.
Yep. And that's possible.
Maybe this is Sid's story.
It could be. And we can see where they're laying the groundwork for that this season, but that doesn't mean that they're going to pay it off.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I still remember back in season 1, a couple of episodes in, saying, like, we haven't seen a lot of Sid. I hope that they flesh her out. And like, man, did they ever.
Yep. I mean, the fact that we get that entire episode that is about Sid's whole life is really significant and gave a lot of insight into her character and into what motivates her.
Yep.
And I think we see even more than David what motivates her.
I don't think David understands, even after that episode. I don't think he has understood what he's watched.
No, he just doesn't get it.
But if we are paying attention, we should come out of that episode understanding Sid a lot better.
Mm-hmm.
So what do you understand having come out of that?
I think I understand that Sid has had a lot of pain.
Mm-hmm.
And Sid is looking for a lot of things. She's looking for someone to share in her pain, to share in her love, to be trustworthy.
Yep.
Is that she's had a lot of experiences with people who are untrustworthy, and she's been untrustworthy herself.
Yep.
And so for someone to betray her the way David does is the worst kind of betrayal.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I agree with all of that.
Mm-hmm.
I think one of the things that we see in the episode in her head is it's something about Rachel Keller's performance. She has a lot of vulnerability in her performance, which makes it easy to read Sid as fragile.
Mm-hmm.
And that episode in her head really, without diminishing her vulnerability, really emphasizes that if she's vulnerable, she's also tough.
Mm-hmm.
Like, if she's fragile, it's deep down. There's a lot of toughness outside that.
Yeah.
You know? I think that's one of the things that's easy, that David doesn't really recognize how tough Sid is.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
I agree. Like, he leaves her behind in all that whole desert battle he plans out. He leaves her out of it.
Yeah.
And we can say, like, oh, it's because he loves her and wants to protect her, but he also doesn't think she's strong enough.
He underestimates her.
Completely underestimates her.
Again and again.
Yeah. And I think that shows in then future Sid is extremely tough and hard and jaded.
Yep.
But doesn't want to be.
Also, can we just take a moment to talk about Sid's missing arm in the future and what that means symbolically?
What does it mean symbolically?
It, on one hand, it represents, I apologize for that. I didn't do it on purpose. In one sense, it represents her toughness.
Mm-hmm.
It represents, like, it makes visually obvious and physical her toughness and her loss and her pain, but it also symbolizes, when I say lost, like she's not whole.
Mm-hmm.
There's something missing from her. And that isn't to say, I want to be really clear, as I sometimes am in this show, literal people with literal disabilities, that doesn't mean they're not whole. But in fiction, a person who has a body part missing that they didn't want, that can symbolically represent other things missing from them as a character.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So I think that the missing arm symbolizes like battle toughness, or represents battle toughness, but it symbolizes loss. Something she used to have, she doesn't have anymore.
Mm-hmm. And
by the end of the series, by the end of the season, we recognize that as being connected to David.
Yeah.
Whether it is David, or it's her trust of David, or it's her love of David, or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So her arm missing represents that she's lost something when David turns on her.
Mm-hmm.
Speaking of which, what do we think? What are we going to say about David's progression this season?
Well, David definitely goes through a lot this season.
Mm-hmm.
In, like Sid, an unexpected direction. Like, people kept saying in other ways that this was like his villain arc. He's going on full villain. And I didn't feel like he was going to until the end, but I'm still unsure whether he's actually full-on villain at this point. It's just complicated.
Because part of the point of this season, in terms of the good and evil theme, was that there's not really such a thing as a full-on villain.
Mm-hmm.
Like, they spend so much time, and even, like, if you take the most possible simplistic and least nuanced view, and you take Farouk just at his word, the hero was the villain and the villain was the hero, well, why can't that happen again?
Mm-hmm.
If that's how it works, if it's a light switch, you click the switch to evil or to good, then he can switch back to good and back to evil. I don't think that is at all how it works.
Mm-hmm.
Either in good fiction or certainly in life.
Mm-hmm.
But like, he was never a full-on hero. And now he's not a full-on villain. You know?
Yeah.
However, what were you going to say, sorry?
Oh, I was just saying, he never believed that he had actually stopped believing he was sick.
Yeah.
And I'd kind of forgotten that.
Yeah.
I kept expecting him to know that he was still sick.
But no.
And so it being like a shock for Sid to reveal that to him wasn't a shock to me.
No. I don't know if we as the audience were supposed to be surprised by that. I don't think so. Like, from the very first episode of the season, we hear voices in his head.
Mm-hmm.
And they're not presented to us as, like, conventional inner monologue.
No.
They're presented to us as, like, there are separate personalities arguing with you in your head. You know?
Yeah, and telling him to say things and telling him not to say things and arguing with each other and with him.
Yep.
Definitely. I think what provides us with the most insight into David this season is the episode with all the alternate timelines.
I agree.
You get a full sense of David's multifaceted personality,
mm-hmm.
or personalities as the case may be. He contains all of those things, all of those personalities that we saw, the homeless man, the drugged to oblivion guy, the rich guy, the guy who's living with Amy, all of those things, the guy who's in the suburbs with 2.5 kids, he has the potential and the personality to have all of those things, to be all of those things.
Or rather, to be any of those things.
Yes, to be any of those things.
Doesn't have the personality or the potential to be all of them, and that's one of the things that is difficult about choice.
Yeah. And it's not only his choices, but the choices of those around him.
Yeah.
And so potentially we could say that the choices that Division 3 has made, the choice to put him in that sphere made him into what he is by the end of the season. And the choice to put him into that sphere seems to have been Carrie and Sid's choice.
Mm-hmm. However, he also has his own choices to make through the whole season and through the,
Yes.
I totally think that what we're saying is that it's not only your own choices that control what happens, but I do think that we see that he still does have choices of how he's going to react.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I think that one of the things that there's that episode All in David's Head has a philosophical meaning and a character meaning. And the philosophical meaning is that for all of us, events shape your personality, and your personality shapes your choices, and your choices shape the events. Mm-hmm. And so it's this cycle of what is the real you, what is the real choice, is billionaire David any less real than the David that we know through the whole show? I would say no.
No, definitely not.
From a character perspective, what that episode is doing is showing us what is it about David's character that is consistent regardless of his choices, if anything.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And it's showing us a little bit of who would David be and what choices would he make if different events happened to him. And that's, I think, a different character placed in those same situations with all those same choices might have made different choices within that situation. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
So we see David as fairly naive still. Even when he becomes a villain, he is, I think that episode reveals to us, he is particularly susceptible to the winds of the events around him. I feel like the Sid that we saw is a Sid who is going to be much more consistent depending on the situations than the David that we see. You know?
Mm-hmm.
And that's partly because of the events that have already happened. But if you start changing events from now on, I think Sid has more inner resolve than David does. Does that make sense?
I think so.
I think one of the aspects of David's character that we see in this season is that he is susceptible, more than usually susceptible, to the things that are happening around him. And that speaks to a malleability of his character. I'm trying to think of a word that isn't weakness. Because I think it speaks to a vulnerability at his very core.
Mm-hmm.
Right? That makes him malleable. That can be a strength sometimes, but also can make him dangerous.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. And in the end, he's dangerous.
Yes.
That is the conclusion of this season. That's the conclusion of the whole show, is someone this powerful is dangerous. No matter how you slice it, no matter what side he's on.
Yeah.
He's worrying. And everyone around him is worrying about what he's going to do. And adding the mental illness on top of that makes him extra dangerous.
And that we could go around and disagree, and some people are going to think he's absolutely definitely villainous, and some people are going to think he's absolutely definitely not, and I'm going to say it's more nuanced than that, but what I think is not up for debate is that he's dangerous.
Yeah.
whether he's heroic, villainous, or somewhere in between, he's definitely dangerous.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that totally is what we are clearly shown by the end of the season.
Yeah, exactly. Should we move on to Farouk?
What do you want to say about Farouk this season?
He's the last character I have written down here. And, I mean, Farouk is basically a new character this season.
Yeah.
We had the Shadow King last season, but this is specifically Amal Farouk.
Yeah, and if there's a distinction between the Shadow King and Amal Farouk, we are really exploring that distinction in this season.
Yeah, exactly. So he is this, like, compelling character. He speaks all these languages. He has these sunglasses that he never really takes off.
Yeah.
Like, you do see his eyes sometimes, but rarely.
Yeah.
We find out he's like 200 years old. He has these relationships that still exist with, like, the driver that he goes and sees.
Mm-hmm.
And so he's such a smooth talker.
He really is.
I did not expect this. I expected him to be much more coarse, much more like the Devil with Yellow Eyes. But he's actually this suave, kind of businessman-ish person who charms everyone and who tries to charm David. And by the end you see that, like, I tried to make you love me. You can't make people love you because I tried.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a really good choice of the show to make him so charming.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of the times when he's debating with David, he makes really valid points.
Really valid, yeah. He's so much better at debating than David is, and so you end up almost on his side.
Yeah. And then we see repeatedly, like, his actions belie his words.
Mm-hmm.
So he talks as if, like, he acts all surprised that David's mad that he killed Amy. When, like, no, as if you didn't know that would upset him.
Yeah, exactly.
But the reason he presents his point of view really compellingly, and that has a lot to do with how charming the actor is.
Mm-hmm.
But it also has to do with how compelling and charming the character is as written.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Exactly.
And we kind of touched on this briefly. Does Farouk develop and grow as a character this season?
I'm not sure. I don't know if he changes. If we can't really figure out whether he changes or not, really. Because he changes in the sense that he seems to come to the side of good, but I don't think he actually does.
No. I think from the beginning to the end, I think there's a massive change, as you said, from the end of season 1 to the beginning of season 2. But the Farouk we see through season 2 is pretty consistent throughout, I would say. He's an opportunist and he's self-centered, and that doesn't always mean that he does evil things, but it does mean that he can never be relied upon not to do evil things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I think that's true from the beginning, and it's true at the end.
Yeah.
I believe him. I absolutely believe him when he says, like, I tried to make you love me. And I absolutely believe him when he says, like, this sweet boy destroyed by vengeance.
Yeah.
I'm saddened. I think that's true.
Yeah, I think so too.
I think he's, he has a very solipsistic worldview. And that makes him both insightful and charming, but also really blind to certain insights about his own character.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. He's very much like, everyone tells me I'm a villain, but, I mean, no one believes they're a villain, really.
No. I guess not.
Is there anything else you want to say about Farouk?
I think we've about covered it. I probably will think of things I wanted to say afterwards, but I think we've covered the main things I wanted to talk about.
And are there any other characters that we've missed that you can think of? Maybe we could talk about Vermilion as an entity. I don't know if they make any sense as a character.
And Fukuyama we haven't talked about.
Yeah, that's true.
Like Vermilion, I'm not sure that we see enough of Fukuyama humanized for us to make any real assessments of him as a character.
Mm-hmm.
He's like an entity or a force or a presence, but I don't know that he is a character in the way that we've been talking about these other characters. You know what
absolutely.
I mean?
Yeah.
Or like we could say, like, what's Fukuyama's motivation? How has he learned and grown? But we would end up just going, oh,
yeah.
right?
Yeah. I'd like to get more of him in the future.
Yeah.
So let's move on to favorites. This is a little bit more fun. What are some of your favorite... Let's start with, like, favorite moments in the season. Or should we start with favorite episode?
I don't know. Let's talk about favorite moments. Okay. I've been talking about favorite moments as we talked about each character.
That's true.
I didn't say a favorite moment for David or Farouk. I don't remember if I said a favorite moment for Sid either.
Mm-hmm.
But my favorite moment of this entire season, although it has complex subtext and whatever, but my favorite moment of the entire season is David floating, singing behind blue eyes.
Yeah.
That made me giddy with joy. I loved it.
Yeah, absolutely.
How about you?
I'm not sure, but there's a little moment in the very first episode where Sid walks into where David is and his back is to her. And she whispers, are you the magic man? He turns around and the way she like stumbles backwards, like she wasn't actually expecting it to be him. The acting of Rachel Keller in that moment is fantastic and I love it. I also love some of the more comedic moments, like you said with Clark walking down the hallway with the Vermilion behind him.
Yep.
And basically anything Clark does, I really enjoy. And anything Carrie does, I really enjoy.
Yep.
Male Carrie, that is. Yes, those are definitely those kind of things are my favorite moments. It's hard to pinpoint since it's just, as a whole, I enjoy the show.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I really think my favorite moments are the ones that really do something I'm not expecting.
Mm-hmm.
And that can be either comic or dramatic. And the most satisfying are the ones that I'm not expecting at all, but afterwards feel like I should have been expecting.
Yeah.
And that's David floating and singing behind blue eyes as the opening fight scene of chapter 19.
Yeah.
Like,
I also love any moment where the camera shows you something and then completely turns around and you're like, oh, that wasn't what I thought it was at all.
and there are a lot of those.
They'll show like the steps of Division 3 that look like a desert, and then suddenly people walk into frame and you're like, oh. And then really the cell that Lenny's being held in that is just completely upside down. And you think you know the perspective, and then it changes, and then you think that you know the perspective, and then it changes again. And it's like, I don't even know what to do with my brain right now. That's definitely what I love about this show and what I want from this show, most of all.
Do you have a favorite episode of this season?
Yeah, I think the episode with the alternate timelines, despite the fact that it lifts out and is so weird, I think that our conversation about that afterwards really built that episode up for me, and I really enjoyed that. Plus just the moments in that episode are just so interesting and so mind-bending. And yeah, it just does something completely different than I've ever seen a show do before.
Mm-hmm.
What about you? What's your favorite episode this season?
I had a toss-up in my mind, and since you've taken one of my toss-up ones, I'll choose the other one and say the episode that takes place entirely in Sid's mind.
Yeah.
Chapter 12, I can't remember what we called it. But anyway, That one was amazing to me because for a lot of the same reasons that the multiverse episode was. It's an exploration of this character. It's so well done to revisit these moments again and again, but see something new every time. Like, that's a lot of what I think complex storytelling can do that is both pleasing and impressive, is emotionally satisfying and intellectually satisfying to be like, I didn't notice this or see this or interpret it this way the first time, and now I'm seeing it differently. And partly because you're adding new information, but partly just because I'm interpreting it differently.
Absolutely.
And that episode gives us a lot of grounding into Sid's character. It gives us a lot of grounding into what the season is about. It gives us a lot of grounding into David's character, frankly. And what it showed me about David's character wasn't very reassuring.
Yeah.
It showed me how little he really understands her. I think that was a really great episode.
I agree.
Legion has lots of music, songs, musical numbers, characters, dancing and singing. Do you have a favorite musical number from this season?
It's the mouse. That mouse singing Slave to Love. I watched it so many times and it was so great. I love that mouse. How about you?
I'm going to beat a dead horse and say David singing Behind Blue Eyes again.
Yeah.
It's the same thing I already said, but
I mean, an MVA, that dance fight from the first episode is amazing.
Yes. That is also really great. I really liked this season all the Noah Hawley, Jeff Russo covers that we got. I liked them all.
Yep, I agree. They really changed your perspective on those songs.
Yeah. And I'm trying to think of which one of those covers was my favorite.
I think I Am Superman was mine.
Yeah. I think so too. I Am Superman, I really liked Cornflake Girl. Their cover of Cornflake Girl. They're really good. And it was I really enjoyed all of that. I hope that we get more of those covers next season.
Yeah, me too. I would like an album of all their covers.
Yeah.
They've done Legion albums, but those aren't part of them.
Yeah, I would like just an album of all the covers and the whole song.
Yeah.
That would be great.
Yeah. So we had our season wrap-up last year that was about season 1.
Yep.
And we asked 9 different questions that we thought season 2 should answer. So
okay.
I'm just going to read them out and we're going to see if season 2 answered them.
Okay, go.
So, what is the Shadow King looking for?
His body.
Ding, his body. We answered that one. What is the mysterious ball orb sphere thing?
It was made by Carrie to contain David from the future. Bang. Answered.
What happened to David's mother/biological mother?
Who knows?
Who knows? That was not answered
at
all. Nope, we do not care about that. What is the deal with David's adoptive parents?
No idea.
Still no idea. They're both dead.
I guess. Yeah, I mean, yes.
What did the stars say?
The stars said you are a god.
Yeah, I think so.
Right?
That's what I said in the last episode, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And I think that's right.
I think you're right.
But we don't actually ever get a concrete answer, and I think that's fine.
That's not a clear and concrete answer, but I think they've given us enough to make that conclusion.
We had a lot of thoughts on the doctors. Is Dr. Kissinger actually dead? Is Dr. Poole dead? And the answer is...
we don't care.
We don't know and care. Nope. Will we return to Clockworks? No, but we did get some shots of Clockworks from, some flashbacks.
Yep.
So that was kind of cool. What is the deal with Walter? Nope,
yeah.
He's just dead and gone.
No one cares about Walter anymore.
And I guess maybe that's what I'm worried is going to happen to Ptonomy, and I'm a bit sad about that.
I hope that's not what happens to Ptonomy.
And then our big question was, what is the deal with Division 3 and what are the divisions? And man, did that question get answered this season.
Yeah, immediately.
Immediately.
In the first episode of the season. So I think that they did pretty good at answering questions, and we did pretty well at asking the questions that were going to get answered.
Mm-hmm.
Except for about David's past.
Yeah.
We don't know anything more about David's past now than we did at the end of the first season.
Yeah.
Like, nothing.
Nothing at all, no. We also made some predictions on what would happen in season 3, that some are funny, some are not too bad. I said that the Shadow King was probably looking for Professor X or something on the astral plane, not something in the physical realm, which I was very wrong about. You thought that maybe they were looking for an astral version of Cerebro, which I don't even remember why you thought that, but...
Because if it was going to be on the astral plane, it was going to be some kind of astral plane device that would enhance his powers.
Right.
I was wrong. Definitely wrong. But I think he was searching for something to enhance his powers.
Yeah, that's true. We thought that the ball was sent by the Division 3.
Definitely
But
wrong.
I definitely theorized that it could have been sent by Carrie.
And you definitely theorized that it was connected to time travel.
Yeah. Which it totally was. We theorized that the plot of season 2, you said that it would be the Shadow King is in Oliver, the conflict is with Oliver and David trying to cope with his illness and escape from control of Division 3, a battle and defeat of Oliver ending with Oliver dead.
So, maybe 40%?
Yeah. I guessed that Oliver would definitely die and there would be no happy ending for Melanie, which is completely wrong. It would be the conflict would be about retrieving the Shadow King from Oliver, sort of, and there would be a strong conflict between Melanie and everybody else, and Melanie would lose everyone.
That's pretty much right.
Almost right. My reasoning was that she would kind of go evil, but I was almost right.
She did kind of go evil.
Mm-hmm.
I think you were almost right, close to right on that one.
Yeah. Will Professor X be on the show? And we said a cameo would be nice. And our guess was all the way to season 3, that season 3 would have time travel and would happen during season 1. That was your guess. So what are our predictions now that we've seen season 2? What are our predictions for season 3?
Well, what are the unanswered questions at this point?
What are the unanswered questions?
I think we still don't know very much about Fukuyama and his deal.
Yeah, absolutely.
We still, unanswered questions still from season 1 about David's mother.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe we'll never get that, but I'm still expecting that we'll get some kind of acknowledgement that David must have had a mother.
Biological mother.
Biological mother. I think those are the questions from season 1 that are unanswered that I still expect and some kind of answer to.
Yeah, absolutely.
The questions from season 2, I think we still basically don't know going to happen, what has happened, what exactly is the nature of what has happened to Amy.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a lingering question.
Yes.
I don't know if we really got answers about the monks and what their deal is.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if I expect to.
No, I don't know if I expect to either.
But I don't think that was answered. And specifically, the monks are good if you understand the secret. What was the secret?
Yeah.
I don't know, but maybe we're never going to.
Yeah.
Questions we don't have answers to. What was Oliver's plan to kill Farouk?
Yeah. That is, yeah, exactly. Is the next season going to take place 3 years later? Because we have Melanie and Oliver in the cube 3 years later.
Yeah.
And so either they're not going to be in the next season or the next season is going to take place years later, which I don't put that past them.
Yeah. Are there anything else that you recognize as unanswered questions from season 2?
What is the deal with future Sid?
Mm-hmm.
Was she real all along? Will we get to see her in the next season? See Sid become her? Will we get to see Sid lose her arm?
Yeah, what happened to Sid's arm?
Yeah. So those questions are definitely there. And will we see Patanomy again?
Unanswered question from season 2. What was the deal with the cow?
Oh yeah. What was the deal with the cow?
That never got addressed at all.
There are a lot of farm animals.
I don't expect that ever to get addressed, but unaddressed questions.
I think David created those animals. Created the cow.
Yeah.
From his mind.
Sure. I'll agree with that, but why? And what does it mean?
Well, cows.
And I feel like the Minotaur remains an unanswered question mark.
Yeah, I think so too.
I don't think it's going to be answered. It might be. I think these unanswered questions, the cow and the Minotaur, and those are aspects of this season being a maze.
Yes.
And also the monks,
yeah.
like that stops. I think that's all an aspect of this season being a maze. So I'm raising questions that I don't think we're getting answers to ever.
Yeah. So we had circles in the first season and hexagons in this season. What shape's going to be next season?
Triangles.
We already have triangles kind of on the shirts and stuff. Is it going to be full-on triangles everywhere, maybe?
Infinity signs.
Infinity signs. Dodecahedrons.
Too visually similar to hexagons.
Yeah, I know, it's true.
Like anything...
Squares.
Anything squares... Anything with more than 4 sides is going to be too visually similar to hexagons to be striking.
Yeah, it's true.
I think.
It's true. Puzzle pieces?
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Maybe that's too on the nose.
Question marks like Doctor Who.
Oh, yes. Question marks everywhere.
So let's do some absolutely wild speculation. What is going to happen in Season 3, Jan?
I think that Season 3 is going to be, I don't know, full-on David doing whatever he wants. I think Season 3 is going to be a lot in David's head.
Mm-hmm.
Unlike the previous 2 seasons where people speculated it was in David's head, I think a lot of Season 3 is going to be actually in David's head. Because he can manipulate the world to be whatever he wants. And he's going to do that.
Right.
And so he will attempt to punish his enemies and help his friends. And Lenny will be there with him the whole time. Lenny will be Lenny/Amy.
Okay.
So she'll be crazy Amy. She'll be Lenny with her crazy personality and like lack of stability, but she'll also have a mothering instinct towards David that Lenny never actually had because she still has that Amy aspect in her.
I like it.
So what's your wild speculation?
I think we're going to start Season 3 with David as the villain and Sid as the hero, and kind of I think they're going to set it up as if it's going to be a superhero conflict between David and Sid.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think we're going to continue that.
Yeah.
I think it is going to be 3 years in the future. I think that at the beginning of Season 3, Melanie and Oliver will be in the cube, but during Season 3, we'll have to bring them out to help or something. Or
yeah.
go in to consult with them or whatever. I think the primary conflict is going to be between David and everybody.
Mm-hmm.
I think David is going to functionally be the antagonist of this season. And I am not sure whether... I think the Shadow King's still around. I think Farouk is still around. And I think that we're still dealing with Farouk.
Yeah, I agree.
Throughout Season 3.
Yeah, I think there's going to be some time travel.
I think there's
again
definitely going to be some time travel. I don't think Season 3 is going to be Back to the Future 2, where they travel back to Season 1 and it all happens at the same time.
But there definitely could be some things there. And like, is Carrie still going to make that ball that David ends up in, or is this not the kind of time travel where we do that? I'm not sure.
Who even knows? Is Professor X going to make an appearance in Season 3?
I think yes. I've heard some rumblings that he is. I don't think he's going to be played by anyone we know, but I think he's going to get a cameo in Season 3 for sure.
I agree with that. Any other wild speculations for Season 3?
I think it's just going to be a crazy ride, and anything we speculate is going to be completely wrong. Because anything I thought that was going to happen after Season 1, I was just like completely wrong. Wow, did I have no idea. To have them show up at Division 3 was just like, oh, nothing I thought was real is real. So maybe Season 3 will be like 10 years later, end of the world, David is old and they're fighting him.
Maybe
in the
Season
future.
3 ends by traveling back to the past to before all of this happens.
Yeah.
And the whole show is a loop. Do we have any, now that we've talked about, we looked closely at this season, last year we looked closely at the first season. Do you have any thoughts about the series as a whole, taking both seasons into account, that we haven't already covered?
I think that there have been some overarching themes of what is reality that I think is going to continue to be that it is a show that wants to make you think about the nature of reality, about the nature of madness, about the nature of mental illness. And I think that we should continue to engage with it in that way.
I absolutely agree.
What are your thoughts?
I think this is a philosophically, especially with like existentialist philosophy, engaged show, interested in the nature of reality and the nature of knowledge. I suspect that if the first season was about ontology and the second season was about epistemology, that maybe the third season will be about narrative even more directly. What's a story, and how do we tell them, and what's the nature of a story, and what makes a hero or a protagonist or an antagonist or a villain, and are those the same thing? I think we're going to be thinking about those ideas more directly in season 3, because that seems to me like the next philosophical place to examine, connected to the whole idea of like what's real and what's not, and how do you know what you know, and how do you understand what you understand, is kind of more directly acknowledging the fictional nature of the show.
So do you want to talk about some of the feedback that we've gotten, some of the questions we've gotten?
Yes, I do. So we got a few things, a few comments and questions over Twitter. Do you have those in front of you?
I do. So I have from @Versafile. Do you feel that season 3 will have compassion for David the way season 1 and parts of season 2 did, or will it just be a tragedy?
I think there's two answers to that. One is there's no such thing as a tragedy if you don't have compassion for the victim. You have to have compassion for him for it to be a tragedy.
Yeah. If
you have no compassion, it's not a tragedy at all. So I do think it will be a tragedy. I do think it will have compassion for him. I think they'll have compassion for him at least as much as we had compassion for Farouk in season 2. Which might not be very satisfying as an answer, but I think that like the show is interested in characters that are nuanced in their motivations and in their relationship to morality. I think, and I really think that we're going to continue to be allowed to or encouraged to root for David.
Yes, I think there's no doubt that he is the titular character.
And that might be, in the way that this show tends to be, that might be a trick. They might be encouraging you to root for someone who's the bad guy to make you re-examine your own assumptions about narrative and morality and whatever. So if you want to uncomplicatedly root for a purely good character, I think you're watching the wrong show.
Yeah.
What do you think?
I think, yeah, what makes us human is to have compassion. And I think there's no doubt we'll have compassion for David in the future.
What else have we got?
We have James Reeves @JamesRee and a bunch of numbers on Twitter. I'm not reading all the numbers. Why is no one vilifying Sid for trying to murder David but failing, only denouncing David for some type of rape that looked like that looked as consensual to me as it ever had? Just because the sex at the time was consensual doesn't mean she wasn't drugged. Just putting that out there. Yeah. He's saying all he did was erase Farouk's propaganda campaign. I think we are vilifying Sid for turning a gun on David, but I do think she was trying to stop him from becoming evil. She was trying to do what they've been doing all along, which was try to stop him from ruining the world. I really get my back up when you call what David did not rape, because he changed her mind. He violated her mind first, and that is a big deal.
Yeah, and we should
It has a parallel in the real world, so that's why it's deplorable.
We should be really upfront and straight about, like, drugging someone so you can have sex with them, drugging someone so that they will then consent is not actual consent. And so maybe it looked consensual, but after her mind had been altered, Sid is not in a mental state to be able to consent. And David, I can give him the benefit of the doubt to accept that he didn't realize that.
Yeah.
I could even give viewers the benefit of the doubt to say that maybe they didn't realize that, but realize it now. When Sid said, "You drugged me and had sex with me," you no longer have the excuse of not understanding what happened.
Yeah, exactly. There was a follow-up tweet to this by Valen. Valen on Twitter, at Valeria Masupi. I don't know how to pronounce that. I believe that's what he believed he was doing, but he should have been straight with her before having sex. Still, though, Sid straight up raped a guy and got him arrested for it. I hesitate to call her the new hero if this is what disqualifies David. I definitely think that we have talked out against, like, there's no new hero in this. There's no hero, there's no villain. That's a dichotomy that doesn't exist. Sid could be the new protagonist. I think the difference between what Sid did and what David did, and maybe this is splitting hairs, but Sid had consequences.
Yeah.
Sid had serious mental consequences for that action, and we see nothing for David having consequences. And that's frustrating to me.
Yeah.
I don't, Sid definitely did something wrong. But she was 16.
Yep.
And
the reason
didn't know what to do.
I mean, like, the reason in the real world, the reason that no matter how much they claim they consent, a adult having sex with a 16-year-old is legally statutory rape no matter how much they consent, is because a 16-year-old isn't capable of consenting in an informed and responsible way. So that's not to say that Sid doesn't carry some moral culpability, but it does mean that her powers are confusing to her, and we just can't make a moral judgment of 16-year-old Sid that's equivalent to the moral judgment we make of adult David, no matter what they both did.
Yeah.
She was a child. Does that excuse what she did? No.
No.
But they're not morally equivalent. This is a absolutely controversial position that I am going to make, which is, I don't think that a fictional character should be judged as morally irredeemable.
Interesting. What do you mean by that?
I think that there is a really harmful tendency to want to redeem people for terrible things that translates into the world of, like, well, they're not so bad, it's a new chapter in their life. But that said, I think that interesting stories involve moral complexity and moral nuance, and there is a value both narratively and morally in showing complicated consequences rather than simplistic ones. So I don't think that, well, character did this, therefore they are now evil forever, is a morally helpful framework for a narrative. I do think real person did this, therefore they should go to prison and no longer be trusted is a acceptable moral framework for society. I know that people disagree with me, and I can accept that. Like, that's their prerogative to disagree with me.
Yep.
And I see their point of people who say, like, you know, once you've raped someone, you're no longer going to be a heroic protagonist. Point blank, period. There's no coming back. I think that's a fair perspective. I'm interested in developing the story. You know what I mean?
Yep.
And that means not foreclosing any direction that development might go in,
Mm-hmm.
necessarily. That said, I think any redemption needs to be extremely hard won.
Yes, exactly. I'm not sure it can be fully realized.
Yeah.
Any redemption.
And I don't think that David and Sid's relationship, if you were to ask me, I don't think David and Sid's relationship is salvageable.
Mm-hmm. No, I don't think it is.
And one of the mistakes that fiction often makes, that real people often make, is that redemption is difficult and painful, and you can't then regain all the things that you had beforehand.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, it's false.
Yeah.
So if David is going to morally be redeemed, that means he can't regain the privileges and advantages he had before.
Yeah. Because
that means he's not actually accepting consequences.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean by that?
Exactly. I understand what you mean by that. And I don't struggle with that because I never saw David and Sid as this like epic love story.
Yeah, I mean, either.
They've always had a very difficult relationship, and I don't think that this is going to end in some kind of happily ever after by any stretch of the imagination.
No, I don't think it ever was.
Probably is going to end with one of them dead.
Yep.
To be honest. So that's all the comments, feedback we had really specifically for this episode, this season as a whole.
Mm-hmm.
So that pretty much, like, is that everything we have to say about the season? Is that at the end of our wrap-up?
Yeah, I think we should briefly say what to expect in the future from Clockworks.
Yes.
But in terms of our discussion of Season 2, I think that wraps up Season 2 of Clockworks for us.
All right. Wrap it up and put it in a bag, put it with a bow, drink it up. I don't know.
That Season 2 of Legion was quite an experience.
Absolutely. And it was kind of fun to do it long live this time. Last time we were about 4 episodes ahead as we recorded. But yeah. And to watch practically every episode 3 times before we recorded, made for an interesting experience.
I'm not going to lie, it was a little stressful.
Yeah, it was a little
we had
stressful.
to watch it, and then watch it again, and then watch it again, and then we had to record immediately, and then I had to edit it in a day and put it out, and then the next episode aired right away.
Yep.
I don't know.
Legion time is a busy time at the Moffat House.
We might, in Season 3, allow ourselves a buffer of an episode.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. We'll revisit that as we're coming up. Yeah. But what are we going to be doing on Clockworks until there's a Season 3 of Legion, Jan?
So we reached a Patreon goal that we would talk about the Legion comics. So we'll be talking about volumes 2 and 3 of X-Men, what is it, Legacy? X-Men Legacy.
Mm-hmm.
That has David in it. We might talk about the most recent Legion comics as well.
Yeah.
We'll tweet out and put on our Facebook page and stuff the exact issues and where you can get them. And so we'll have at least one episode chatting about those comics. We might have some interviews on the docket, but some of those seem to have fallen through, so we might not have any interviews at all.
Yeah, without naming names, there's someone involved that we were talking to in Season 1 who said, maybe we should talk in Season 2, and then now has said, well, maybe we should talk in Season 3.
Yeah.
Which is fun.
The people who make Legion are very, very busy people.
If anyone involved in making Legion happens to listen to this podcast, we'd love to talk to you whenever it's convenient for you.
True story. We've heard rumors of a 4th season of Fargo. If there is that in the in-between seasons, we will definitely watch all of it and record probably one episode about the whole season. So look for that if there is another season of Fargo. But other than that, we're pretty much on a hiatus until the next season of Legion, which I assume will be in about a year.
Yeah, we might, in the interim, I think we are likely to do what we did in the interim between Season 1 and 2, which is if there are movies or TV shows that strike us as being connected to Legion in an interesting way, we might watch them and talk about them on an episode of Clockworks. That is a intention rather than a plan.
Yeah, so definitely stay subscribed, so when Legion starts up again, you'll get those fresh new podcasts in your podcast player of choice. Okay, I think we've gone on for long enough. I'm surprised if anyone's still listening. Thanks so much, guys, for listening to our little podcast here and supporting us. You can support us on Patreon, patreon.com/clockworkscast. Give us any feedback or responses you want. We'd love to respond, especially on Twitter, at Clockworkscast.
And sometimes we haven't responded in the past when we were saving up a response to say on the podcast. But in the break, we'll respond in a tweet. So
Absolutely.
The people that we just answered on the podcast, we just clicked like and didn't say anything. That's because we were going to address it in podcast form.
All right. Well, I've been Jan Moffat.
I've been Paul Moffat. Goodbye.